Hi everyone, I'm Lee Amigo. I'm the editor here at the Web Host Industry Review, and I'd like to welcome you all to another one of our WHIR webinars. Today's session is called Best Practices for Growing Your VPS and Cloud Server Business, and it's going to feature a presentation from Lowell Anderson, who is Director of Product Marketing for IaaS at Parallels. I'll let Lowell introduce himself a little more fully in a moment, but before we go any further, I wanted to take care of a couple of simple housekeeping items. First off, questions. You may have noticed already, but if you haven't, there's a question submitting function in the webinar software, so if you want to submit your questions, you can use that. We're going to save a few minutes at the end of the session for your questions. However, you can submit them throughout, and I'll keep an eye on those, and then I'll put them to Lowell at the end. If you do ask a question and it doesn't get answered because we run out of time, or because maybe it's a bit too specific to do in front of the group, rest assured that we will have a record of all the questions that are asked and who asked them, and somebody will reach out to you via email after the webinar. Or if you have a question that you'd rather ask in private, there will be some contact info on screen during the Q&A period, so you can definitely reach out to Lowell that way. As always, there will be a video archive of the webinar available as of, say, early next week. If you want to revisit a slide or a part of the presentation or share it with somebody else, it'll be in the archives at thewhir.com/webinars. Yeah, as I said, early next week, and it'll be there alongside of a lot of other great webinars that we've done, and including quite a few from Parallels. So definitely worth a look. So without further ado, I will get things started by turning things over to Lowell.
Great. Well, hello everyone. I'm Lowell Anderson, and I'm Director of Product Marketing here at Parallels. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to present some of the best practices for growing your VPS and Cloud Server business. The best practices that I'm going to discuss today include the results of our most recent customer and partner surveys, which include some of the largest service providers in the world. Combined, we will also be discussing some of the more recent PVC and PSBM product improvements that can be leveraged to help improve the service quality and performance of your VPS offerings as well. The material that I'm going to present also is now included in a new series of white papers which we're releasing in conjunction with this webinar. And at the end of today's presentation, I'll include the link to the page on our website where you can download these documents. During the presentation today, I'm going to try to use many examples of our existing partners that are implementing these best practices in action, and then the details, many details will be available in the white papers as well. So throughout the discussion today, I'm going to focus really on two separate vectors for enabling success for your VPS hosting business. The first vector we're going to discuss is how to drive revenue, and we'll focus on two factors there. The first factor is increasing ARPU through cross-selling and upselling. Excuse me, I'm having issues with my slide. And the second factor is reducing customer churn through differentiating your offerings to drive loyalty and stickiness with more differentiated products. Then we're going to shift gears and focus more on the technical side of managing your VPS business. And there we'll focus on how to reduce cost through optimizing your operations, what to do to set up your server to increase its reliability, its stability, and its performance, and at the same time help minimize the infrastructure cost. And of course, managing the density is one of the key elements in helping to manage infrastructure cost, while at the same time ensuring that you're delivering a high quality of service to your end users. And of course, the objective of all this is to help you be profitable and to grow your business dramatically for your VPS and Cloud Server offerings. So the first subject we're going to talk about is how to improve average revenue per user through cross-selling and upselling. When we survey at least U.S. VPS offers, we see that the average VPS offering is typically between about $30 to $50 per month on average. But what's important to understand there is what we can do to help improve the margin of that average revenue per unit. And so on my little chart there, I'm showing that if you're achieving roughly $5 in profit for VPS at $30 of VPS, and you can upsell that customer with either incremental variable offerings like additional RAM and additional storage space, or you can create add-ons, software add-ons to that offering, as well as additional service offerings. Increasing that revenue per user has a fairly minimal increase on your overall cost, and so that increase really helps drive significant improvements in your margin. So to look at examples of this, the first thing we should focus on is how to maximize the revenue at the point of sale. This is when the customer comes into your website, and it's when you have really your best opportunity to help allow them to maximize your revenue. One way to do that is to provide packaged add-ons like Plesk. And when we surveyed our customers, we looked at which were those most popular add-ons and which ones drove the highest attach rate and the highest additional revenue. They focused really on 5. Plesk, control panels, backup services, server monitoring services, antivirus or anti-spam offerings, and development bundles. All of these different types of offerings have a fairly high attach rate. The other thing you want to do at the point of sale is maximize those variables that you charge for on a per server basis and make it easy for customers throughout the selling process to optimize their server for their configuration. So I'm showing here just a couple examples of this in use, and this is from a service provider called Servant. And you can see here that they're doing a couple things. They are first making it very easy for the customer to select additional software options, and then secondly, they're making it very easy throughout the sales process for them to upsell and size their servers for their particular usage. The second thing that we see our successful service providers doing is very proactively monitoring server usage and offering upsized packages. So we've had several examples of our current service providers who monitor the number of domains on servers, and as their customers start to approach domain limits, offer them additional upsell Plesk licenses, or that can monitor the amount of disk space usage on a particular server and offer at that time additional disk space. So monitoring the customer's usage of your service throughout its life cycle and then proactively upselling them new capabilities as you see them approach a certain usage level is a good way to help continue to drive ARPU. Another way to drive ARPU is to use cloud marketing to help create an increased sense of value for the customer. And this has become very popular with many, many service providers today. We all know about the hype and the reality behind the movement to the cloud. And it's not necessarily hype, it's real, and it provides real value. And what we see is a lot of service providers moving to add cloud server marketing to their particular offerings. And so I'm showing some examples here from 1&1 and from Servant, who offers an offer, or from Intergenia, I'm sorry, that offers a offering called vServer Cloud. The idea here is that they really use the unique features of PVC, its ability to instantaneously resize the offering, to enable sliders and adjustments on their website to create what I'd call a cloudy or dynamic content for customers so they can personalize and tailor their own offerings. So consider repositioning your virtual servers or your VPSs to include more cloud-type marketing so that you're catching the wave of this new migration to the cloud. The other thing that has a huge impact on your ability to be profitable is customer churn. And there's a pretty big gap in the churn levels that we see. On average, for VPS offerings, the churn levels are typically between 2.5% to 4% per month, which is fairly high. But as we looked across our provider base, we saw that there was a very dramatic range between the best performers and those that could use some improvement. ranging from 50 to 60% differential between some customers that might have had a range as high as 25% per year. The other thing to understand is that churn is very expensive. It has a significant impact on your growth. And also each of those customers that you use, you now need to expend again that additional customer acquisition cost through marketing and services and provisioning to get new customers to replace those customers. So reducing churn is a very important thing to focus on in terms of maximizing your profitability. There's lots of ways we can do that other than just dropping price. We know that the most significant factors that influence churn are price and quality of service. Of course, those are the things that we absolutely have to be able to deliver to even be in the game. So you have to have a competitive price, and you have to be able to deliver a quality of service that meets your customers' expectations or exceeds those expectations. But there are other things we can do to differentiate within those parameters to increase your attach rate and try to drive stickiness by offering freebies, creating personalization, and creating special offers. So I'll use HostGator, who's been one of our most successful service providers over the last couple of years, as an example of how they do this. And when we see how they market, we can see that they make a big deal about the amount of free capability that comes with each VPS offering. Many of these things are high value add, and some of them are basic values that come with every VPS. But they make a point of making sure the customer is well aware of all the capabilities that come with that server so that they see the value that they're getting and they develop an attachment to that offer. The other thing that many service providers do is create special offers. This creates, of course, a sense of urgency, but again, also helps the customer feel like they've achieved a pricing advantage or an advantage over that will help them attach to that offer longer term. And then lastly, one of our partners, GoDaddy, has had a very good success with bundling Plus together with their virtual server offerings, and that's really helped create some differentiation in the offering as well as provide additional upsell for them. Another way to help reduce churn is to create special branded bundles for target customer segments. And so I'll use an example here of a branded bundle for MetaTraders. And what this service provider has done is really create a much higher priced offering specifically targeted at a specific customer segment, MetaTraders or financial traders, who in reality are actually more concerned about ensuring that they're getting a server that's going to meet their particular needs than they are about whether they're paying another $15 a month for that particular piece of technology. And so what they've done here is really done a good job of focusing a particular offering on a target segment of customers that maybe aren't so price focused but much more focused on high quality. Other examples of this would be game servers, for example. The other thing we see partners doing is creating their own branding around their bundles, and in this case the term stackable, they're really trying to leverage the concept of containers as components that can be added up to create an overall compute process, and I'll have some more on this in the next slide where we talk about how to be unique. So one way to be unique is to try to offer something different in terms of pricing. And so this particular service provider, who's called Xmission, has created a whole new way of offering VPSs that they've been quite successful with. What they do is, instead of charging customers on a per VPS basis, they're allowing the customer to deploy as many VPSs as they want, and they charge them by the amount of memory, total amount of RAM that they lease that can be used across those VPSs. This type of marketing and this type of offering might appeal to one specific segment and give them a significant competitive advantage in that segment versus a standard offering. One thing it certainly does is differentiates them and gives them something different to offer customers with the same basic infrastructure on the back end. So look for ways to do things that are somewhat unique, or maybe that are applicable to a particular target audience. In our customer surveys, we also discussed with our partners their use of social media and how they're using that today. And we're really seeing a significant usage of social media. Over 80% of service providers today are leveraging Twitter for real-time updates. This is a great way to connect with your customers. It's a great way to provide a high level of service for the customer. It's also a great way to present them with additional offerings if that was what they opted into. And so this is one thing that's becoming very prevalent. At the same time, we see almost all service providers now maintaining a Facebook page to provide testimonial and dialogue for their customers as well. And overall, this is really helping them contain their cost. So we see that across our service providers, over 75% of them are spending less than $5,000 annually on marketing. And instead of that, they're really increasing their use of social media to both market as well as provide support and create this sense of community for their customers. We talked about how price and how quality of service are the most important things for churn, but we don't always want to try to just drive the business to compete on price. One way to compete is on service. When we ask service providers, how do you compete with Amazon? How do you compete with Rackspace? They tell us that their customers are concerned about service, about being able to contact someone quickly, about being able to optimize configurations and market directly to their specific customer base. And so it's important to select those things that you do differently, and in this case service, and showcase how you're different. And then look at a way to create that affinity. And we have some examples here. Many of our partners really highlight service as their #1 key competitive advantage. Over 80% service providers claim they differentiate on quality of service. So it's important to try to make sure that you're clear on that. Clearly that's one of the advantages over the larger Amazons of the world. Another thing to do is share your accolades and testimonials. It helps when small businesses are coming to your site. If they see that they're part of a larger group, if they're big names on your site, or satisfied testimonials of other businesses that customer can relate to, it helps give them a sense of confidence that they're part of a community of satisfied users, and that's going to help you maintain that customer and help them believe that they have indeed selected the correct service provider. And other ways to develop customer loyalty include building customer communities, and we see many partners, if not all now, using forums, using blogs and so on to create customer forums where they can both make announcements, but also customers can make suggestions for best practices. They can also create open forums where customers can highlight problems and solutions that they've discovered in the use of your service. Another way to help retain customers is to create rewards programs. So one way to do that, of course, is to offer reduced prices for longer-term service contracts, as we're showing in this example. Another way to do that could potentially offer a month of free service every 18 months. This will keep that customer hanging on to that service and reduce their affinity to move. Now I'm going to switch gears and move away from more of the marketing and the positioning aspects of VPSs and talk more about optimizing your actual infrastructure within your data center and how to set up those servers and use that to help reduce cost. Of course, one of the key things we focus on with VPSs is how to optimize the number of VPSs per server. And what's important to understand is there isn't one single answer there that works for everybody. What we suggest is that you focus on matching the server to the offerings that you're going to provide and the business model and the target niche. So decide on what kind of offerings and what quality of service you want to provide. Are you going to provide a very heavyweight, compute-intensive type and offer hosted desktops that deliver lightweight web applications? And so I'm providing here just a couple examples of those in action. You might have a workload that is deploying lightweight web apps. You use a smaller server, and you can probably drive 80 to 100 separate instances per server. In the case of a very intensive, database-intensive service, we see a much larger server, and in this case maybe lower densities that you can achieve. The main point here is that regardless of what you do, it's very careful to plan and adjust those densities and do what we call planned overcommit. So in a couple slides I'm going to give you some examples of how committing your server impacts your probability of failure and the reliability of your system. And as I said, we see a very broad range of densities across service providers on a per server basis. Of course, a lot of this depends on the type of hardware they've deployed, but it also depends on the type of offering. So we see service providers that are deploying 10 VPSs per server all the way up to some that are deploying well over 200. I talked to one that was deploying 400 hosted desktops on very large servers. So depending on the use case and how it's being used, there's just a huge range and high variability depending on the type of service offering that you want to provide. So what is an overcommitted system, and is it a good thing or is it a bad thing, and how do you do it and when you should do it? Well, an overcommitted system, very simply, is when the physical system, the physical server you have, is overcommitted for a particular resource. And so in many cases that's RAM, it could be disk space, it could be other factors that are overcommitted, and when the hard limits for that resource across all its containers add up to more than it can deliver. And I'm going to provide some examples of this. Should you overcommit? Well, of course, the answer is it depends. And one of the big advantages of PVC and PSVM is it allows you the capability to design these levels of overcommit and to control those. And most service providers overcommit their resources in some degree simply because when customers buy VPSs, they very rarely use 100% of those resources 100% of the time. And so the service provider is trying to optimize the usage of their hardware. The message for today, though, is in deciding whether or how much you should overcommit, it's important to do some analysis and to carefully monitor your servers and make those adjustments in real time so that you're achieving the quality of service that your customers expect for that offering. I'll give you an example of how important it is to make small adjustments to the number of containers deployed on a server. In this particular example, I'm going to make some assumptions here. One is that I have a server, and we'll focus on RAM for this particular example. I have a server that has 60 gig of RAM available. And for each of the containers deployed on that service, we've provisioned to the customer 2 gig of RAM for each container. However, these containers have only an average usage, or most of the time use only 50% of that allocated memory. However, each of them peak at 100%, or full 2 gig for a minute out of an hour. So this is a very simplified example. I'm sure in reality you never really see consistent usage rates across all the containers on the server. But the point of this is it gives you here with this graph an idea to understand how sensitive the system can be to simply adjusting that total number of containers and how that impacts the reliability. So what I've done here is run a probability analysis of failure on the particular server dependent on the number of containers that you have deployed. So on the far left, if we deploy 60 containers on this server, and 50% of the time each of those containers is using a gig of memory, then there's really no room on the server for any containers to be in peak. So that's the 0 that's there. What this means is that the probability more than any time is about 64%, and it makes the reliability of that particular server only 36%. Obviously, that's not acceptable for really any commercial VPS application. But what's interesting to see here is that as we drop the number of containers deployed per server, and in doing so allow a number of those containers to now be in peak, we can see that the probability of failure goes down very rapidly, and the reliability of the system comes up dramatically. So what's important here, I think, is not to debate whether 50% is a good number for average or for typical memory usage or not, but to simply understand that very small adjustments in the amount of containers deployed on a server can have a significant impact, especially when the usage rate of that particular resource or that limiting resource is very low, or less than 50%. So here we can see if we drop the number of containers on the server down to 56, that means that out of those 56, 8 containers could be at peak load at any one time, and the probability of that happening is very small. Just for your information, the way these numbers are calculated is using the binomial probability function in Excel. It's very straightforward to use. You use the number of containers as the number of trials, the number of containers that can be in peak as the number of successes, and then you use 1/60th as the probability of failure for any one of those containers. And you can generate these numbers yourself and make adjustments to the allocation ratios and so on. It's an interesting analysis to do to try to look at how sensitive your system is to overcommit. So what's important here, of course, is that this reliability increases dramatically as density is reduced, and it's really important to fine-tune this. Fine-tuning can have a big impact on what you achieve from a QoS perspective. So how do we manage this density with PVC and with PSBM? Well, we have some new features in PVC and PSBM, and they include the ability to manage the CPU limits, and this is touched on in one of the best practices white papers, the overall infrastructure best practices white paper, which I'll point you to at the end of the discussion today. The best practice there is really to ensure that the CPU core number and limits that you set on your containers are set according to your hardware environment. So some of the things that we see is that we may have a service provider who has multiple different types of servers deployed, but they're setting the CPU limits on their containers the same across all those servers. And so, of course, some of them get overcommitted at a higher level than others, and they have variations in their reliability across servers. So it's important to ensure that you set those based on the hardware environment. Also, with PVC 4.7 and PSBM now, we have the ability to set disk I/O limits, and these are important because we see disk I/O as being one of the density limiting factors in many environments. And what disk I/O allows you to do is establish a per container I/O limit so that high disk I/O activities in one container don't slow down the performance of other containers. So over time, if you see one container that's hitting its I/O limits on a constant basis, you can either expand its I/O limit or you can move it to a different server with less density. Overall,
sorry to interrupt. I just thought maybe you could clarify for folks what PVC and PSBM are.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So PVC is Parallels Virtuoso Containers, and PSBM is Parallel Server Bare Metal. I should have clarified that. Those are our two offerings for service provider virtualization solutions. And our overall recommendation for disk I/O limits, and you can read more about this in our disk I/O limits best practices, is to set that limit at 75% of the max disk throughput. What you'll see in the white paper is that when we ran certain analysis of disk I/O limits, as you start to approach 80% to upwards towards 100% of the max disk I/O, you will see the performance of the server rapidly decline. So we try to keep that below 75%. Another feature which we've just recently released in PVC 4.7 is called vSwap. And vSwap is a way to control the allocated memory that you have by specifying the physical memory and virtual swap space that can be used by a container. In the past, there have been parameters called UBC, user bean counters, that have been used to do this. And those have been fairly complex to use. They've been very difficult in many cases to adjust and understand how each of the different types of parameters relates to the other. And this has been simplified quite a bit with this new vSwap, which allows you to just use two different parameters to set the physical memory and the swap space. And again, we've just released a vSwap best practices white paper that shows you some of the performance benefits of vSwap, as well as provides some specific recommendations of how to set the vSwap parameters, as well as how you might want to use those together with the UBC parameters to help optimize the use of memory on your particular server. I want to wrap this slide with just a best practice that we noticed in talking to customers about how they overcommit their servers. And one of the interesting things that we see is that some service providers are seeing that on their larger, more expensive VPSs, those customers have a much higher usage rate of those particular resources. Whereas on the lower cost VPSs, which might be used just intermittently, they might be just used as test servers, there's a much lower usage rate. And so what they're doing is they're provisioning larger VPSs on less dense, less overcommitted servers, and then they provision their lower cost VPSs at much higher densities on servers that have a higher level of overcommit. And in doing so, again, they're delivering to those specific customers the quality of service they need, but they're really optimizing the density for that particular offering. So that's a very interesting use case of how some customers across the range of VPSs offering are actually choosing to provision them into different levels of overcommit on their particular servers. So I also want to talk about server configuration, and we'll focus on a couple things. One is on hard disks. Hard disks, of course, are one of the most unreliable components in a particular server, and so it's really important for you to be able to do everything you can to make those disks as reliable as possible. On average, we see most service providers have now moved to RAID 10 arrays with 4 by 500 gigabyte total space, which gives them about 1 terabyte of usable space per server. It's important as you're setting up your swap space for those I/O operations to make sure you do that relative to the amount of memory that's available on your server. And this chart that I'm showing here, again, is available in the best practices documents that I'll point out at the end of the discussion. Another thing that we see service providers moving to is really using hot plug compatible disk bays and RAID controllers, so that when you do get disk failures, they're very easy to replace, and that they don't have to bring down the server in order to do that and cause a service interruption for the customer. Fans, again, some of the most unreliable components on a particular server. We had one example of one service provider who lost the fan on his RAID controller, and the RAID controller appeared to still be functioning, but because it was overheating, they were getting a significant amount of disk errors as a result. So try to avoid fans if you can, and try to use battery backup on those controllers, so if they do fail, it's easy to bring them up again. Secondly, it's important to make sure your software stack is as reliable as possible. We suggest making sure that you use the compatible native environment for the version of either PVC or Parallels Virtuoso containers that you're using. For example, PVC T47, which is our latest release, was released with RHEL 6. It's also compatible with RHEL 5, but we'd suggest that you use the latest version of RHEL with the latest version of the particular offering that you have. Also, try to be consistent with the hardware nodes that you're deploying. It makes it much easier for you to maintain your system. Reduce the risk that we have driver-related problems. Use of third-party drivers, try to minimize or standardize on those as well. So just in general, if you can keep your configuration synchronized across all the servers, makes everything easier both for you to maintain and manage, but it also makes the systems more reliable. And lastly, I wanted to point out a trend that we've seen over the last year when we released Parallel Server Bare Metal 5. So Parallel Server Bare Metal 5 delivers to you in a single load the ability to install either hypervisors or containers on a particular server. And it does this through the deployment of a single disk. Now the pricing and what you pay per container is identical to PVC, and it uses the same technology as our latest PVC releases for containers. But what it does allow you to do is to easily, with a single disk, install on a bare metal server. Because when you install the PSBM disk, it puts in the host operating environment, configures it properly, and then puts the containers on top of that host environment. So it makes it very easy to reduce all the risk issues associated with the items that I just discussed on the Optimize Your Environment bullet point. So we're seeing quite a few, actually, of our service providers now moving to PSBM instead of PVC as a way to deploy containers moving forward. And lastly, on this point, we do have now with both PVC and PSBM, both of these compatible with Pixie Boot so that you can do network-based installation across your servers. Helps speed installation, and it also helps you, again, be much more consistent in how you deploy on a particular server. So that wraps up our best practices discussion for today. I wanted to leave you with a couple things that you could do today just to highlight some of the points. How can we increase ARPU? Well, make it easy for your customers to purchase add-ons. Position your most profitable packages so that it's very easy for you to maximize your dollars at your point of sale. Secondly, help reduce your customer churn by creating customer loyalty programs, creating that sense of community amongst your customer base, and proactively reaching out to them with social media. Work to improve your operational excellence. I gave the example of using PSBM as a mechanism to deploy PVC and help streamline your installation process and optimize your environments. And lastly, take advantage of some of these PVC features to maximize your density and at the same time improve your performance. And use some analysis, but also carefully monitor those servers to ensure that you're getting high levels of quality service that you're trying to achieve. And in the end, hopefully these best practices will end up allowing your business to grow and be more profitable. Before I finish, I wanted to point out where we can get some more information on this. Throughout the discussion today, I've been talking about our latest best practices documents, and there are now 4 of those that have been recently released on the Parallels Virtuoso Containers product page. If you go to that page, in the left nav there's a left navigation menu item called White Papers, and if you go there you'll see on that tab 4 new white papers available. The first one focuses on the business aspects that I discussed in the first half of the presentation, and the second one focuses on the infrastructure management aspects of optimizing your servers. There are also 2 smaller white papers that offer very detailed content and test results on the use of vSwap as well as the use of I/O limits to maximize your container performance. And then lastly, before we close, I wanted to also announce that coming in June on PartnerNet, we're going to start a best practices forum. And during this forum, we're going to be publishing every month an example of a best practice and then asking our service provider partners to contribute use case examples of those best practices in action. So that might be a great way for you to look at how and see how some of the other service providers are using some of these best practices in action. And every month we're going to be offering a nice prize for the best use case example that's submitted every month. So look for that coming in June, and we'll be announcing that in our customer newsletter as well. So that wraps up our presentation for today. Liam, I'm sorry. I think we have a little bit of time for some questions.
Yes, we do. So we've got a few questions during the presentation, so I would love to just reiterate to everyone, if you have questions now, you can feel free to submit them. Let's start with a question that just came in as you were showing the white papers. I noticed that they were all sort of Linux focused. Do you have plans to launch any white papers for Windows best practices?
Yeah, I should have pointed that out. So we do today in our partner net already have a best practices for Windows VPSs, and that best practice white paper is also available in our partner net white paper section as well. I think what I will do with that is I will move that onto the main website as well, so people can see that that are non-partners as well. But that exists if you're a partner and you're logged into PartnerNet. You can find our Windows best practices there.
Okay, that same person was asking, does that also include disk I/O limits?
No, we don't have disk I/O limits on Windows VPSs today.
Okay, and maybe maybe at some point during the Q&A we could revisit that this slide with the links too. But anyway,
yeah, sure.
People can certainly follow up with you if they're looking for any of that, any links to that information too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very easy to find. It's parallels.com. Go to the PVC product page. You'll see the white papers. So should be no confusion.
Okay. So here's an interesting question. So somebody's asking whether there is a technical or an ethical barrier to a traditional VPS host calling their services cloud or cloud VPS, and whether using local storage and calling it cloud is something that you just can never do, or I guess basically how do you define cloud?
Yeah, well, I think there's a range of what people call cloud offerings. So when we see some people just see cloud as moving from on-premise servers to hosted servers. And from many people's perspective, that's the first phase of the cloud. There are then other features that are added to create things cloud that are basically cloudy. Yes, virtualizing your storage is one way to create, highly dynamic and scalable storage. But for many customers, that's not necessarily needed at all. For a small SMB, the ability to create a large compute clouds is something they never will need to do. But maybe what they need from the cloud is just usage rate billing and the ability to dynamically adjust the size of their server as needed. And so we have service providers today that are using PVC, but instead of deploying very complex what you call the more traditional cloud or cloud type of definition where you have highly scalable compute resources and virtualized storage capability, they're offering a VPS with the control panel that allows the customer to adjust the VPS size and adjust that billing on a daily basis. For that particular customer, that's the level of cloudiness that they require, and it works well for the SMB. For a large enterprise that needs, a very scalable, highly elastic compute cloud with scalable storage that can scale across hundreds of terabytes, obviously this wouldn't be a sufficient definition of cloud. But for the SMB and the small operator that's trying to take advantage of using a service provider to outsource their IT, it's very efficient for them.
Okay, so I guess a question that I would add to that is, I mean, if you're a a traditional VPS hosting provider and you have decided that you want to start providing cloud servers to your customers, I mean, or start making that distinction or start repositioning your VPS servers as cloud servers, would you recommend that somebody just change the branding around their VPS servers, or is VPS and cloud server something you can offer side by side? I mean, can you make some kind of distinction for your customers?
Well, again, it's really up to the service provider, but I can talk about what we see in the marketplace. And so what we typically see is that many service providers continue to deliver their traditional VPS offerings, and then alongside that, they'll add or provide additional services and capabilities that make those offerings more cloudy. So in the particular examples that I use, they're offering these customers a specific cloud control panel, and they're adjusting the billing so that the customer, instead of a fixed monthly bill, is able on a daily or hourly basis to log into their control panel, adjust the amount of resources that they have been provided, and then their billing will be adjusted accordingly at the end of the month. So but what we see is those customers offering, those types of cloud servers alongside their traditional VPS offerings. Then secondarily, we see then some service providers moving to offering a complete virtual data center environment. And that is the type of offering that allows larger businesses to really fully outsource their IT. And that type of capability is typically offered under a different context. It's usually offered, instead of as a VPS, it's offered as a cloud computing center, as a virtualized data center that includes the ability to provision a compute cloud with multiple VPSs, have those VPS networked, have highly scalable cloud storage, and so on. So there's room, I believe, to answer your question, for all three of these different types of examples to coexist, and there's many examples of service providers who are deploying all three of those, and on the back end using different technology to support those.
Okay, so somebody had a question about how Virtuoso Containers handles efforts to provide high availability using clustering or load balancing.
Yeah, so with Parallels Virtuoso Containers, you'll see, I would point you to, we do have clustering best practice guidelines for PVC on our website, so it supports clustering. And we have those user guides available on our website for you to view, so I'd probably suggest that you go look at our clustering suggestions for PVC. Also, releasing at the end of this year, we're going to also release the next version of PVC, which is going to be called Parallels Virtuoso Server. We announced this during Parallels Summit this year, and Parallels Virtuoso Server is going to extend PVC with a clustered storage capability, which will then allow high availability VPSs as well. So today you can use our clustering, and the white papers that we have in the PVC Linux and PVC Windows, those documents are available for you to view. And in the future we'll also have a clustered storage offering as well.
Okay. And I apologize to the asker if I interpret this question incorrectly, but because they just started with "what about?" But I think what they were saying was, would it be effective to use solid-state drives on VPS templates to improve density and I/O performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we do have actually examples of service providers who are using, in some cases, SSD drives. They're a little bit more expensive. Indeed, it depends on what's limiting your density. So for some service providers, disk I/O is limiting to their density, and they look at what are the options for improving that density in those situations where I'm I/O limited. Certainly an SSD drive would improve that, but at the same time they could also look at moving that particular customer to a less dense server. Typically what I see is that most service providers, when they see servers that are going into I/O limit, there's typically one or two customers, a small majority of customers on that server that are having significant, requiring significant amounts of disk I/O. And instead of then using more expensive, they typically move those customers to a less dense server versus creating specific servers with SSD drives. But certainly from a technical perspective, yes, SSD drives would improve your I/O.
Okay. So this is a question. I'm just gonna read this one. So with Google moving into storage with Google Drive and big players like Amazon or Dropbox not able to compete on price, do you think there's hope for traditional VPS hosts to sort of offer storage in the future?
Well, certainly we see some of our service providers like SoftLayer, for instance, Rackspace, for example, offering block storage as a service. I think there's definitely room for service providers to leverage their storage resources to provide storage-based products for certain customers. Today, one of our most popular add-ons into our Parallels automation is a backup service, and those are service providers called Backup Agent, which allows cloud backup of your desktops. And Backup Agent provides a significant value over just a basic block storage capability that you get from Amazon EBS or S3. The service providers that are providing Backup Agent are using their back-end SAN systems as the block storage for Backup Agent. So I think to answer the question, bulk storage as a service is obviously going to see continued price pressure. I was aware, I think Google has dropped their price down to $50 a month per terabyte, whereas Amazon, I think, was at $100. So again, you'll probably see Amazon respond to that, I would guess. So we know where those prices are going. They're going to continue to drop. But there is certainly, I believe, room for value-added storage services, and we see examples of that occurring. The average SMB can't use block storage. They need services that use storage on the back end, and I think there's lots of opportunities for service providers to deliver those types of services.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to answer the questions, but I would say that probably not a great model to launch a storage service for MP3s right now. But I don't think you're going to get, as a smaller service provider, not going to get customers coming to you specifically looking for storage. But if you can package storage solutions around your other services, especially for small businesses, I don't think they're going to necessarily want to go elsewhere.
Yeah, and with Google at $50 a terabyte, it's pretty difficult to get margin out of that. They're probably not getting a significant amount of margin out of that themselves.
Somebody just asked what's a good way to determine proactively customers that are going to have high disk I/O usage?
I don't know. When we talk to different service providers, basically what they're doing is, I did give one example where we do have one service provider who has definitely observed that the larger, more powerful VPSs that they sell have much higher usage rates than the smaller VPSs. And so I think that's a rough predictor. But in general, what we saw was that most service providers are provisioning those VPSs and then monitoring the servers overall as it approaches its disk I/O limits, and they're typically seeing out of 30 or 40 customers on that server, one or two, and that are having a significant higher usage. I'm not sure I'm sure that has to do with the particular applications the customer's deploying into that VPS, and I just think there's practical difficulties in, even if you did know that these particular customers drive this type of I/O, how could you segment them out during the ordering process? it'd be very difficult to do. And then once you segmented them out, could you provision them onto different servers? So what we see today, I think, is more of a reactionary process as new customers are coming onto the server to try to actively monitor the servers as they start to approach their limits. But I don't have a good answer, I don't think, for how you could proactively maybe survey an incoming customer, what their usage levels would be. But it is a good question, and there may be a way to do it. I just haven't seen it.
Okay, well, we're right almost at 3 o'clock now. I don't know if you think maybe this is a good time to wrap things up. I know we have a few questions that we didn't get to. I'm just not sure that we're going to necessarily have time to answer everything.
Yeah, and that's fine. I can certainly, I left my email up here on the screen, so I'm happy to try to address any questions that anyone has via email or other questions. So
sure, and I should reiterate also for anyone who missed the introduction, we do have a record of all the questions that were asked and who asked them. So if you did ask a question that didn't get addressed during the Q&A, Lowell will have a copy of your question. He or somebody else can certainly reach out to you with an effort to answer it. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending and for submitting your questions, and we did get a lot of great questions from the audience, which I love to see, and thank you very much for that. Of course, I'd like to thank Lowell for offering up some pretty great insight into a subject that obviously is very, very significant to a lot of hosting providers. So thank you very much to everyone, and have a great day.